Well, good evening. I'm going to start out tonight by a very deep apology. What I did last year, I don't do. Understand that. We've been doing this for 33 years now, traveling around the country, holding seminars here and there. We'll be heading up into Canada this year again. But last year, I had to cancel this meeting about, 3 or 4 days before the meeting? Yeah, that wasn't right. That wasn't fair. I should not have done that, and there was no way that I could do anything but do that, given the circumstances of my wife's health situation. So thank you for being understanding. Thank you for tolerating something that I do repent of, and I'm asking your forgiveness, because that's not fair. It's not right. But we got her down to California with no problem, and unfortunately we battled for another month with the same issues, and about 3 days before Thanksgiving we had to lay her to rest. But again, thank you for repeating the invitation, thank you for your tolerance, and thank you for this meeting that we're holding tonight. All right? So I have to start with that. This is the only church I'll make that apology to. All right, our subject for tonight. What is the final generation? What does that mean? I'm going to ask you to take your Bible, if you have it. We're going to read just one text tonight. It's in the book of Hebrews, Hebrews chapter 11. No, it isn't. It's from the wrong chapter. Hebrews chapter 9. Hebrews chapter 9. And we'll read verse 24. Hebrews 9:24. One text. For Christ is not entered into the holy places made with hands, which are the figures of the true, but into heaven itself, now to appear in the presence of God for us. All right? So now we know what that means. This is in heaven, not the holy places made with hands, but into heaven itself, now to appear in the presence of God for us. The question is, what is he doing in the presence of God for us right now? Not talking about after he ascended to heaven, not talking about during the Middle Ages. What is he doing now, right now, that is different from anything he has done before this period of time? And that's what our subject is going to be. What is Christ doing in the heavenly sanctuary? Now, what I'm very grateful for is that we have some extra help from various sources. I'm going to read a statement here from Patriarchs and Prophets, page 357. The blood of Christ, while it was to release the repentant sinner from the condemnation of the law, was not to cancel the sin. Do you realize that that is exactly opposite to what almost all Christians believe? When your sins are forgiven, they're canceled, they're gone, they'll never be seen again, is what Christians have been teaching and are teaching today about what happens when you ask forgiveness for a sin. It says the sin, would stand on record in the sanctuary until the final atonement. Those two words you'll never hear outside of a Seventh-day Adventist church. Final atonement. What does that mean? What's the final atonement? What was done at the cross, isn't that the final atonement that needs to be made? Then, in the final atonement, by virtue of the atoning blood of Christ, the sins of all the truly penitent will be blotted from the books of heaven. Thus, the sanctuary will be freed or cleansed from the record of sin. Won't that be a time when all the records of all of our failures and all of our rebellion are removed forever and never will be brought up again in heaven? In the type, this great work of atonement or blotting out of sins was represented by the services of the Day of Atonement. So if you want to know more about the final atonement, go to the Day of Atonement in the book of Leviticus, read about it, read what Ellen White says about it, and understand something more than we've understood up to this point. All right, another statement. That reference is Patriarchs and Prophets 357. This one is Early Writings, page 254. The minds of all, now those words are so important, all. That means every one of us. The minds of all who embrace this message are directed to the most holy place where Jesus stands before the ark, making his final intercession for all those for whom mercy still lingers. So something special is going on during this period of time. The minds of all who embrace this message. And then one more, Testimonies, Volume 5, 575. All, there's that word again. All need to become more intelligent in regard to the work of the atonement, which is going on in the sanctuary above. Not what happened 2,000 years ago, as important as that is. All need to understand and be more intelligent in regard to the work of the atonement, which is going on. When this grand truth is seen and understood, those who hold it will work in harmony with Christ to prepare a people to stand in the great day of God, and their efforts will be successful. 2 points on that last sentence. Grand truth is a phrase Ellen White doesn't use very often. She talks about present truth, she talks about truths of the Bible, but grand truth is a special phrase that she applies to those truths which are crucial to us today. When this grand truth is seen and understood, it says their efforts will be successful. Have you been praying for the Lord to come? Have you been trying to do some work to encourage that to happen? Well, I hope and pray so. But have our efforts been successful to this point? Not quite yet, have they? So when this grand truth is seen and understood, their efforts will be successful. So I think that this is one of the most important Bible subjects to address that we have ever come across. Now, 50 years ago, 60 years ago, 70 years ago, another gentleman who held revival meetings long before I was even born into this old world said this: the concept of the final atonement is the one and only contribution that Adventists have made in Christian theology. Did we come across the idea of the Sabbath all on our own? We had to have a good little lady from the Seventh-day Baptist Church persuade us that the Sabbath was the right day to be worshiping on. So we didn't do that on our own. The final atonement is the one and only contribution that Adventists have made. You are not going to hear about the final atonement outside of Adventism. I'm trying to make that point as clear as I can. This is a special, unique truth that you will only hear from an Adventist who understands these things that we're talking about. And then he said this, and this was kind of interesting, I thought. Many now teach that the saints will not be sinless until the second advent of Christ, but such a teaching must result in casting aside the doctrine of the cleansed sanctuary before Jesus comes. It must lead to rejection of the final atonement in the most holy place and the special sealing to take place in the minds of the 144,000. Are you fully aware that there's a lot of controversy on this subject right now within the Seventh-day Adventist Church? Will there be a people after the close of human probation that will ever be able to live without yielding again to the temptations that Satan throws at us? The Christian world says, no, that's not going to happen until Jesus comes and he gives us a new nature and we can stand before him like the angels. That's the Christian understanding of the final atonement. But that isn't what we're talking about here. The final atonement is what will bring about the second coming of Jesus Christ. And that's why it's such an important subject right now. I could read more, but I'll just leave it with that. There are crucial issues at stake in our understanding of these things. So, what is the final atonement? That's the question, and what we're going to do right now is get some help from people who understood it very well, and we have kind of lost sight of it. There was a book that was written back around 1940s, something along then. It was called The Sanctuary Service. Have you ever had a chance to read anything by M.L. Andreasen on the Sanctuary Service? I hope you have. Probably the best book that I have seen on that subject. It's an old book, but it is a very reliable book. So what I'm going to do with you tonight is we're just going to put some of these things up here on the screen, and I'm going to look at one chapter in that book, The Sanctuary Service. It's the next to the last chapter, and we're going to look at some statements that he has made here, and I'll make some comments as we go along, and we'll see what we can find out about this final atonement from someone who understood it, I would say, as well as any Seventh-day Adventist that I've ever come acquainted with. So here we go. We're going to put it on the screen, go through them fairly quickly. The final demonstration of what the gospel can do in and for humanity is still in the future. Christ showed the way. He took a human body, and in that body demonstrated the power of God. Men are to follow his example and prove that what God did in Christ, he can do in every human being who submits to him. Do you believe that? Do you believe that what he did in Jesus Christ, he can do in every human being? Hardly anyone in Christianity believes that. This is totally, totally special in our understanding. And then she added a few more statements. The world is awaiting this demonstration. When it has been accomplished, the end will come. Look at that statement right there. The world is awaiting this demonstration. What does that mean? Hasn't the world had a great demonstration of the power of Christianity, victory over sin, in the martyrs of all the ages that have gone by, in all the people who have stood firm for Christ no matter what the cost would be? What does this mean, that the world is still awaiting this demonstration? Let me share something with you that you might find at least interesting. Mahatma Gandhi: I like your Christ. I do not like your Christians. Your Christians are so unlike your Christ. Does the world need a demonstration? Did Mahatma Gandhi need that demonstration and never apparently found it? That there should be no difference between Christ and Christians. Another one I thought was interesting. Juan is a very precocious 12-year-old. He reads his Quran regularly. He prays several times a day, takes part in the religious discussions in his local mosque, is a moving force among the young people there. I asked him if he had always been a Muslim. No, I used to belong to a Christian church here in Cuba, he told me. What about your family? Oh, they are still going to that church, but they are also sometimes coming to the mosque with me. Why did you decide to become a Muslim? I asked. He looked at me very seriously and said, I was looking for a religion that had higher standards and clear answers to my questions. I think that's a sad story. Do you agree? Why would he not have been able to find clear answers to his questions and higher standards in any Christian church that he would visit? Now, this is not about Adventism. Understand this. This is just talking about Christian churches. And he did not find answers to his questions, and he did not find anything except through the mosque that he had found. All right. There you are. There's our introduction. The world is awaiting this demonstration. When it has been accomplished, the end will come. God will have fulfilled his plan. He will have shown himself true and Satan a liar. His government will stand vindicated. That's a big word. Vindicated. What's vindication? Charges are made. Satan has made many charges against the character of God, his laws, the way he runs things. And vindication is a taking care of all of those charges and laying them to rest. Vindicating God's way of doing things. All right? So here we go. We're going to see what this means. The plan of salvation must, of necessity, include not only forgiveness of sin, but complete restoration. Salvation from sin is more than forgiveness of sin. Forgiveness presupposes sin and is conditioned upon breaking with it. Sanctification is separation from sin and indicates deliverance from its power and victory over it. The first is a means to neutralize the effect of sin. The second is a restoration of power for complete victory. That's what it's all about to be a Christian, my friends, right there, in one paragraph. Sin no longer having control over our lives. Yes, we can make mistakes. Yes, we might slip, but it is not reigning in our lives. It's not controlling us. It is not dominating our everyday activities. Victory over it, a power for complete victory. Now, what I'm doing here, as you probably can guess, I'm just picking out some sentences in this chapter. We're not going to read the whole chapter. This is some special sentences. Thus it shall be with the last generation of men, and by the way, just one more point here. This book was written back before the issue of the names men and women got confused, as they are today. This was written in the time when men meant mankind. It meant men and women. And that was the way the word has been used up until the last, I would say, 10 years. All right. Thus it shall be with the last generation of men living on the earth. Through them, God's final demonstration of what he can do with humanity will be given. He will take the weakest of the weak, those bearing the sins of their forefathers, and in them show the power of God. They will be subjected to every temptation, but they will not yield. Do you believe that? They will demonstrate that it is possible to live without sin, the very demonstration for which the world has been looking and for which God has been preparing. It will become evident to all, that word again, that the gospel really can save to the uttermost. God has found true in his sayings. Isn't that what the great controversy is all about? Who's telling the truth? God or Satan? Those are the only options available. And we are deciding on that particular issue in this period of time in which we're living. It is in the last generation of men living on the earth that God's power unto sanctification will stand fully revealed, fully. The demonstration of that power is God's vindication. It clears him of any and all charges which Satan has placed against him. In the last generation, God is vindicated and Satan defeated. This may need some further amplification. That's the issue at stake that's right now being settled throughout the world. Do Christians believe in victory over sin? Not just victory over some sins, not just sometimes, but victory over all sin in our lives by the power of God. All right, let's skip over a little bit farther in the chapter, and let's look at some other points that Elder Andreasen has made. The demonstration which God intends to make with the last generation on earth means much, both to the people and to God. Can God's law really be kept? That was the very first question. Do we need a law? Lucifer said. Do we need a law? We can think this through. We can make good decisions. No law is necessary. Can God's law really be kept? That is a vital question. Many deny that it can be done. That's most of Christianity. Others glibly say it can. When the whole question of commandment keeping is considered, the problem assumes large proportions. I mean, if this isn't as big as anything that I am aware of, and then we have a problem. God's law is exceedingly broad. It takes cognizance of the thoughts and intents of the heart. It judges motives as well as acts, thoughts as well as words. Commandment keeping means entire sanctification, a holy life, unswerving allegiance to right, entire separation from sin, and victory over it. Well may mortal man cry out, who is sufficient for these things? If you haven't ever said that, you must be living on a different planet than I am. Who can do this? Who can have victory over all these problems that we're facing in our lives? Who is sufficient? Yet, to produce a people that will keep the law is the task which God has set himself and which he expects to accomplish. I hope you caught that right there. You and I do not have the capabilities for total victory over sin. We've been in a fallen situation for 6,000 years, and we've all experienced sinning, every one of us, rebelling against God. who is sufficient for these things. And God has set himself the task to do that. Yes, he needs your agreement. He needs your approval. He needs your standing with him on these issues. If you're fighting him, he can't work with you. But if you're standing with him and pleading for his power to come into your life, you are part of the solution to the great charge of Satan. The law can't be kept. All right, let's finish out that last sentence. Commandment keeping means entire sanctification. Oh, let's go backwards. Commandment keeping means entire, am I still not right here? When the statement and challenge are issued by Satan, no one can keep the law. These are Satan's words. No one can keep the law. It's impossible. If there be any that can do it or that have done it, show them to me. Where are they that keep the commandments? Don't you think that's a valid question that Satan can ask? You say it can be done. Where are they? I haven't seen them. Even the great heroes of faith made mistakes and sins. I love the answer. God will quietly answer. Here they are. Here are they that keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. Won't that be a day when God can say that? Not here are they that preach the law. Not here are they that want to keep the law. Here they are. Watch them. And have you ever wondered why there's something called the close of human probation at the very end of human history? Never before seen in that way in all of 6,000 years. A general close for all human beings living on this planet. Because this question has to be answered. Can God's law really be kept? Because God is in charge, God is empowering. We're not talking about human beings doing anything. We are yielding, we are accepting whatever he says. Can it really be done? Satan says, no, it can't, and I'm going to prove that it can't. God says, yes, it can, and I'm going to prove that it can. It's that simple. That's why there's a close of probation. Everything is going to be on the table. No special favors anymore for Seventh-day Adventists or anyone else. We're all on the same issue. Are we approving God's statements or are we approving Satan's statements? There will be no other statements that can be accepted or allowed. And that's what we are involved in. All right, a little more. When God commands men to keep his law, it does not serve the purpose he has in mind to have only a few men keep it, just enough to show it can be done. It is not in line with God's character to pick outstanding men of strong purpose and superb training and demonstrate through them what he can do. It is much more in harmony with his plan, in harmony with his plan, to make his requirements such that even the weakest need not fail, so that none can ever say that God demands that which can be done by only a few. It is for this reason that God has reserved his greatest demonstration for the last generation. This generation bears the results of accumulated sins. If any are weak, they are. If any suffer from inherited tendencies, they do. If any have an excuse because of weakness of any kind, they have. If therefore these can keep the commandments, there is no excuse for anyone in any other generation not doing so also. That's what the last generation is all about, folks. If we're going to be that last generation, that's us. It was supposed to be done earlier, but couldn't be done. People were not ready to move into this situation of proving God or Satan right in the great controversy. There will come a time when this is what God is going to say. Here's the evidence. You look at it, you decide who's telling the truth. We suffer the penalty in our bodies and in our minds of accumulated sins. All right, here we are as we close out this part of our study. God is ready for the challenge. He has bided his time. The supreme exhibition has been reserved until the final contest. Out of the last generation, God will select his chosen ones, not the strong or the mighty, not the honored or rich, not the wise or the learned, but common, ordinary people will God take, and through them and by them make his demonstration. Satan has claimed that those who in the past have served God have done so from mercenary motives, that God has pampered them, and that he, Satan, has not had free access to them. But if he were given full permission to press his case, they also would be won over. But he charges that God is afraid to let him do this. Give me a fair chance, Satan says, and I will win out. And so to silence forever Satan's charges, to make it evident that his people are serving him from motives of loyalty and right without reference to reward. Stop right there. Satan has claimed all the way from the beginning that we are specially favored by God. He gives us special blessings. He gives us wealth and health and all the good things of life. And that's why we're Christians. Didn't he say that about Job? Job might have been the first book written in the Bible, we're not sure. And if it was, it's the book of the last people who will be living at the end of time. Because we are going to be asked to show what Job, one man, showed before the watching universe. And you and I are going to be asked to show that very same thing before the entire watching universe. That God's way works. He can give victory. And we've seen it in our lives. It has happened. So there we have the charges and the issue at stake. Can God's people really obey God because it's right to do it, no matter what benefits come along with it? Benefits are great. I love benefits. I like things that I don't have to work for. But this is not one of those. This is one in which we and God will be working hand in hand to make decisions for the future and for the present. Let's see, did I miss? I should have read that one sentence there. To clear his own name and character of the charges of injustice and arbitrariness, and to show to angels and to anyone in the universe who's watching, to show to angels and men that his law can be kept by the weakest of men under the most discouraging and most untoward circumstances. God permits Satan in the last generation to try his people to the utmost. They will be threatened, tortured, persecuted. They will stand face to face with death in the issuance of the decree to worship the beast and his image, but they will not yield. They are willing to die rather than to sin. I want that experience, my friends. I want to come to that place where if it's necessary, I'll die before I'll yield to that temptation one more time. And that becomes a big issue for every one of us. Are we willing to go that far? Just about done with this. Will they stand the test? To human eyes, it seems impossible. If only God would come to their rescue, all would be well. They are determined to resist the evil one. If need be, they will die, but they will not sin. Satan has no power and never has had to make any man sin. He can tempt, he can seduce, he can threaten, but he cannot compel. Are you clear on that, my brothers and sisters? He cannot compel. And now God demonstrates through the weakest of the weak that there is no excuse and never has been any for sinning. If men in the last generation can successfully repel Satan's attack, if they can do this with all the odds against them and the sanctuary closed, what excuse is there for men's ever sinning? What does it mean that the sanctuary is closed? No more forgiveness of sins. No more forgiveness for a sin committed after the close of human probation. The sanctuary's business of forgiving sins is at an end. No one in Christianity believes that, besides a few Seventh-day Adventist folks. That is not. The close of human probation you will not hear about in most of Christianity, because it's just not believed. Now listen to this. The matter of greatest importance in the universe is not the salvation of men, important as that may seem. Have you been hearing things about how important it is to win souls and to share the good news? It says it's not the salvation of men. The most important thing is the clearing of God's name from the false accusations made by Satan. The controversy is drawing to a close. God is preparing his people for the last great conflict. Satan is also getting ready. The issue is before us and will be decided in the lives of God's people. God is depending upon us, as he did upon Job. Is his confidence well placed? Satan is getting ready. He knows what's at stake. He loses here, he's done. And he's going to put everything he's got into this final battle. He did that with Christ and failed. He'll do it with you and me. And I trust that we will not fail. Job did not fail. We need not fail. So the most important thing then is clearing God's name. If God's name isn't cleared from the accusations made by Satan, nobody's going to heaven. There will be no heaven if God's name is not cleared from the false accusations made by Satan. Because someone will always have a question, and sin will arise again, somewhere, sometime, in God's universe. Unless it is totally settled, once and for all, this time around, so it never comes up again. That's how big this issue is in our lives. It must never be forgotten, however, that this testimony is a testimony of life, not merely of words. In him was life, and the life, skipped it. To give people the light is more than to hand them a tract. Our life is the light. As we live, we give light to others. We know that in our heart of hearts. Without life, without our living the light, our words abide alone. But as our life becomes light, our words become effective. It is our life that must testify for God. Okay, conclusion time on this section. All this is closely connected with the work of the Day of Atonement. On that day, the people of Israel, having confessed their sins, were completely cleansed. They had already been forgiven. Now sin was separated from them. They were holy and without blame. The camp of Israel was clean. Wouldn't that have been a great day? The Day of Atonement. They had already been forgiven. If they would have died before that time during the year, their sins were forgiven. They would be in heaven. That's not the issue. The issue is, can God complete his work? Can he cleanse all sin from not only your life and my life, but from this entire earth? And can he do it so there'll be no questions asked after this about God's fairness and his mercy? Can he do it the way he's doing it? The camp of Israel was clean. What an outstanding statement. Well, I'm guessing that the camp of Israel maybe stayed clean for the next 15, 20 minutes or half an hour. And then somebody said something, and it started all over again. This time it's got to be different, doesn't it? It's got to be different this time, better than the way it was set up in the Old Testament. This time we're not going to have any do-overs. It's finished. It's done. It's all taken care of. And so, concluding thoughts here. We are now living in the great antitypical day of the cleansing of the sanctuary. Every sin must be confessed and by faith be sent beforehand to judgment. Did you notice every sin? As the high priest enters into the most holy, so God's people now are to stand face to face with God. They must know that every sin is confessed, that no stain of evil remains. The cleansing of the sanctuary, this is the sentence I want you to remember. The cleansing of the sanctuary in heaven is dependent upon the cleansing of God's people on earth. Think about that. How could it be any other way? I confess my sins. You confess your sins. And then somebody says something again, just like before. And we say, Lord, can you hold it a little bit? Can you wait one more hour? I'll confess this sin and then I'll be done. And then you say, Lord, can you hold it 2 hours? I've got something to take care of in my life. And then it'll all be done. It would go on forever, wouldn't it? If every one of us had a third chance, a second chance, a fifth chance to confess the very same sins for which we had been forgiven earlier. This time it has to be final, and it has to be done completely. And so we have the cleansing of the sanctuary dependent upon the cleansing of God's people on earth. How important, then, that God's people be holy and without blame. In them every sin must be burned out, so that they will be able to stand in the sight of a holy God and live with the devouring fire. Well, there it is, friends. The best I have seen in print on this subject from about 70 years ago now. We've had it all along. How much have we taken it to heart? How much have we believed it? I guess I'm going to say that. How much have we believed it? Because this seems so incredible that a whole generation of people could ever come to that kind of situation in which they were done with sinning forever, for all eternity. Don't wait until the second coming of Christ to get victory over sin. It's not going to happen then. It has to happen during the final atonement process in the heavenly sanctuary. It has to happen during the time in which we are living right now. All right, now the last part of what I'm going to talk about tonight. I'm not done yet. You have to bear with me a little longer. Living in the Day of Atonement. That's us. We are living in the Day of Atonement. Because right now it's been going on for how long? 1844. The final atonement has been going on for 170 years, and we're still wondering why Jesus hasn't come, wondering why it's taking so long. And it's not waiting, again, I'm going to say it, it's not waiting until X number of people are saved. It's not waiting until X number of people have gone totally wrong. It's waiting for God's people to vindicate Him, tell the truth about Him, tell the truth about His law, tell the truth about His character. That's what the delay is. The delay is not about things other than that. When that is done, when there will be a people, and God can recognize that, only He can, a people who are ready to live 100% for God and never walk back into sin again, and will die rather than to sin, for that, at that moment, God says, enough, we're finished. The great controversy is over. Satan is lost, and there will be peace in heaven for the rest of eternity. Otherwise, I'm not banking too much on too many things happening other than God's vindication and God's power. That's what I'm concerned about more than anything else in my life. So, now, we're going to get practical right now. Living in the Day of Atonement. What does that mean, to be living in the Day of Atonement? I'm not going to cover all the things that we could talk about, but I'm going to list 3 specific areas that are pretty normal for us today. Seventh-day Adventists say we should not use alcoholic beverages. Okay? Yeah, we say that, but do I have that ability if I've been living in alcohol for 50 years, 30 years, 20 years? Do I have that kind of ability to say I'll never touch it again? Yes. I don't think I have the ability to carry it out. You can say it, and you can pledge it, but only God has the ability to carry it out. All right? All right, alcohol use. Seventh-day Adventists talk about being vegetarians. Well, that's kind of interesting. Was Abraham a vegetarian? Not really. Was the prodigal son's father a vegetarian? What did he fix for that last son coming back from his wanderings? And isn't there a whole chapter in the book of Leviticus telling you what meats are okay and what meats are not? You've heard all these things in evangelistic meetings. These are normal that Seventh-day Adventists understand these. There are unclean meats and there are clean meats. But where is it ever stated that we are going to leave off all meats? And so that becomes a question. Is this something that is necessary? Or are we just making it harder for our young people to grow up and stay Seventh-day Adventists by refusing them that privilege of eating the clean meats that God has allowed? Okay? Seventh-day Adventists also say that we shouldn't be wearing jewelry. Well, now that is depending on what you call jewelry, I guess. What is jewelry that we shouldn't be wearing, and why shouldn't we be wearing it? And why should we tell our 11-year-old daughter that she shouldn't put it in her ears or around her neck? when everybody else seems to be okay with it? So, those three areas, that's all I'm going to talk about. Alcohol use, vegetarianism, and the use of jewelry. Now I'm going to start out with the issue of alcohol. Is there a text or two in the Bible that you have come across that says that alcohol use isn't the best way to go? Do not look upon it when it stirs itself aright in the cup, when it rises. There are a few statements. But once again, when it was very easy to turn clean, unfermented grape juice into moderately addictive wine. I mean, you just had to let it set out for a little while. You know, you've tried that. It sits out, it ferments. It becomes wine. And they didn't have refrigerators. They didn't have all the things that we have to keep the fermentation from not happening. So we have this whole issue right here. Is that a practical issue? Can that be done? Is it that important? All right, just keep that in mind. Vegetarianism. What about that day that Abraham saw three men walking toward him across the field? What was his first thought? What was the first thing that he thought to himself? I've got to prepare a dinner for them. That's what was done. You didn't just have somebody come in for a few minutes and walk out. You prepared a dinner for them. And the dinner was the best fatted calf that he could set before these people. And by the way, who were these people? Do you remember that? They were angels. And one of them was even told was Jesus. That's right. So they ate clean meat during that meal that Abraham prepared for them. Okay, so we got that. Now, what about jewelry? What about jewelry? Came across this little letter that came into one of our magazines. The Bible is more pro-jewelry than anti-jewelry. Job, whom God said was righteous, received several gold rings from relatives. Joseph received a ring and gold chain from Pharaoh. Abraham sent Rebekah a gold ring for her nose, 2 gold bracelets, and gold and silver jewelry. Well, how about that? The Bible really speaks positively of those gifts that were made, all during Bible times and even in Christ's time. So what are we dealing with here? Why should that be a big issue? Why should we say to our young people, you really shouldn't wear jewelry? If the only answer we can give to that is the church doesn't allow it, that's not good enough. If the only answer we can give is talk to the pastor about it, that's not good enough either. If the only answers we give is a statement of doctrinal beliefs, that's not good enough. We need to have persuasive evidence that this is a better way to live on practical issues. Because we're living in the Day of Atonement, remember. We're living in that day. And these are the temptations of this day. And I think you know that the battle of appetite is probably the biggest battle that every one of us to this day still fights. This is one area which doesn't go away easily and quickly. And we could have a lot of stories about how things like this develop. I'm going to share a couple of things with you that are kind of interesting. That's all I'll do. This is just of interest. Adventists were often virtually alone in standing against the obvious scientific evidence of the health benefits of moderate alcohol use. A little wine is going to be good for your heart. You've been hearing something like that. 83 studies of 600,000 individuals showed that 5 to 6 servings of an alcoholic beverage per week was related to higher levels of death from all causes: stroke, heart failure. There really is no safe level of alcohol use. That's one study. Let me share another one with you. Drinking even low or moderate amounts of alcohol causes cancer of the oropharynx, the larynx, the esophagus, the liver, the colon, the rectum, and the breast. All alcoholic beverages, including beer, wine, and hard liquor, can cause cancer. Another interesting one. Large amounts of I'll get to that in a minute. Here's one more first. The Seventh-day Adventist Church has often stood almost alone in its position that alcohol is one of the most life and health-destroying beverages in existence. This is just not something that's popular to even consider in our culture. Now the issue of vegetarianism. Large amounts of meat protein caused a 60% increase in cardiovascular disease. That's heart-related diseases. Large amounts of protein from nuts and seeds, 40% reduction in cardiovascular disease. So look at those two issues just by themselves. Meat protein, 60% increase. Seeds and nut protein, 40% reduction in cardiovascular disease. Another one that I thought was really kind of interesting, because we just don't even think about this. Compared to non-drinkers, fathers who drank during the 3 months before conception were 44% more likely to have babies born with congenital heart disease. Fathers. Their only access is through the reproductive system. Fathers who drank during the 3 months before conception, 44% more likely. If the prospective dads were binge drinkers, 5 or more drinks per session, there was a 52% higher likelihood their baby would have a congenital heart defect. Well, those are a few little interesting thoughts. What I'm sharing those with you is for simply saying, even the scientific world is beginning to understand that alcohol is probably one of the most dangerous things we can put into our bodies if we want to live healthfully. So right here, we have something, at least a little tidbit from scientific evidence, even though the culture says absolutely not. Anybody can have a few drinks, and if they're just careful. If they have a driver to drive them home, it'll all be okay. Whatever. All right, what about the last issue, the one on jewelry? What does God say about what he wants to look at, what he wants to see, in men and women? The heart, the character, our spirit, our attitude. Are we living like Jesus lived? Do we have the same values that he had? Is that seen very well if we are wearing everything under the sun on our bodies to show how much we can improve our looks or our cultural standing? Any item of jewelry is a demonstration that we've got to add something to ourselves so that we'll look better than we really are, somehow. Does the Bible teach that God looks at the heart and wants to see the heart? I think that's fairly evident. That's what God is looking for. So we have a few things here. Now, what does this all have to do with living in the Day of Atonement? You know, Martin Luther. Do you expect to see Martin Luther in heaven? I'm looking forward to it. Why wouldn't I? Look what he did for Christianity. But Martin Luther was not a health reformer. He did not live a good lifestyle diet-wise. He even had his, every evening before he went to bed, his tankard of ale. That's Martin Luther, the one you and I expect to see in heaven. Why is Martin Luther okay in using alcohol and a non-vegetarian diet, and I'm not? Why is that a reality? I'm going to give you a principle here. If you don't understand this principle, you will not be able to understand the Bible correctly, especially the Old Testament. Have you noticed that, well, let's just be very specific here, that there are clean meats and unclean meats in the Old Testament, okay? We understand that. Have you also noticed that there were certain things allowed in the writings of Moses that you might be uncomfortable with? Slavery was allowed if you were in trouble and you needed to have someone else pay your physical bills and your debts and take care of all the problems that you had arranged, you could sell yourself into slavery. You get no money out of it, but your family would be taken care of. All right? And God says, yes, slavery is allowable for 6 years. No more than that. Unless that person decides at the end of 6 years, he's better off now than he was before this whole thing started. And if he lets the landlord keep on paying the bills and providing the food, he'll stay a slave for the rest of his life. He could make that choice. You know how they did it, don't you? Out to the house, the front of the house you go, and you get one of those iron awls or picks or whatever, and you pierce his ears. Ear piercing was a sign of wanting to remain in slavery. That's kind of interesting, I thought. All right, so God allows and regulates slavery. What else is interesting about this period of time, especially, as I'm saying, in the Old Testament? Is there something here about marriage? Marriage. This is something as simple as marriage in the Bible, in the Old Testament. You know, we think about Jacob, and we recognize that he made some bad mistakes. One of the worst ones, of course, lying to his own father. Do you expect to see Jacob in heaven? Okay, I do too. He repented. His name was changed. Have you noticed that? His name was changed. He got a new name, a brand new name. Israel. Power over sin. God's power. Israel. So we have all of this going on. And Jacob, you know, I kind of give Jacob a little credit here. Maybe his most serious defect, if you want to call it that, was his excessive love for Rachel. What do I mean by that? Well, remember when he was sent away from his family, he left his family because he couldn't stay around there with Esau. And so he left his family and he went off to his relatives. And there he saw someone in the field that struck his eye. Chemistry, we call it. And that one person was his special person. Okay, Rachel. Good old Laban. Laban knows what's going on. He's a smart guy. He sees that look that transpires between Jacob and Rachel. And he says, okay, I'm going to make this tolerable and profitable, and everyone will come away happy. And so he calls Jacob in. And he says, I understand that you have intentions toward my daughter. And draws him out. And he says, now I've got a bargain for you. This will be really a bargain for you. All you have to do to have my daughter in marriage is to work for me 7 years without pay. Your pay will be my daughter. And Jacob has to consider that option. And what decision does he make? 7 years, it'll go by. I can tolerate that. I can live that way. And then that night, Laban is oversmarting himself, isn't he? He thinks more ahead than he should. He says, I've got 7 years out of him. I'd like 7 more. So here's his next ploy. He sends in Leah to be Jacob's partner in marriage, and it's done. Leah is his wife, and Rachel is not. But next day, he calls him right in. He calls him right in and says, now, you think I've given you a hard bargain here. Listen, I've got something even better for you. You understand, first of all, Jacob, you understand that the older daughter is always given in marriage first in our culture. To marry a younger daughter first is not appropriate. You understand that, don't you, Jacob? And you understand something else, Jacob, and this is the bargain I'm going to offer you. A person with 2 wives can always bear more children and have more crops and have more servants and have more wealth than the person who's only got 1 wife. I'm going to give you both of them.
You're going to have Leah, and you're going to have Rachel, and you will be looked upon as a pillar of the community because you're acceding to my little bargain. Well, there it was, Laban's bargain with Jacob. Did Jacob agree to both of those conditions? Yes, he did. He worked 14 years without pay to marry Rachel. I'd say that's a love relationship. What about you? Cost him a lot. Cost him 14 years of his life as a young man, I'm sure. And now he has to work for his wife. And did God regulate that as well? Did God bless? Let me just ask you, did God bless Jacob's marriage to Leah and Rachel? 12 sons, right? Whose names are going to be written on the New Jerusalem's walls for all eternity. I call that a big blessing. God blessed Jacob's love for Rachel, even though Jacob thought that's a pretty raw deal I've been handed. I can just imagine the thoughts going through Jacob's mind. But he did it. He was blessed. And here we have 12 sons that were to be the ones who would allow Jesus to come into this world and vindicate Israel and cause Satan's plans to be defeated. Well, of course, you know that isn't the way it worked. But that was God's plan. And that was God's blessing to Jacob. So now, notice carefully. God blesses Jacob's polygamy. Got that? It's polygamy, pure and simple. God regulates Israel's slavery, 6 years without permission. God looks on the heart, even if we're putting things on outside that he doesn't really appreciate. He still looks on the heart. That's what he's interested in doing. So you have all of these things that God does. Do you think he likes all of that? Let me just ask you that question. Do you think God likes slavery? No. Do you think God likes polygamy? No. Do you think God likes putting a lot of jewelry on our bodies? No. Then why in the world does he bless it, regulate it, and help us to understand that? I'm going to give you one more. This is maybe the toughest of them all. The day after Moses comes down from the mountain with 10 tables of the law. The Israelites have gone astray in a very serious way. And Moses is so incensed at this that he takes those 10 sacred words of God, throws them to the ground as an indication that Israel has broken their covenant with God. How can he bless them ever again? And then the next thing that happens, here's the tough part. The next thing that happens, Moses says, all who are on the Lord's side, who have not participated in this, come and join me, stand by me. And who came and stood by him? A whole tribe, the tribe of Levi. That's why they were given the privilege of serving in the temple. The tribe of Levi came and stood by Moses. We have not participated in this. We do not agree with it at all. And then the next command from God through Moses, take your sword in your hand and kill all those that have violated my law. Now consider what that means for us today. If God were to tell some of us, take your gun in your hand and kill every unfaithful Adventist who has participated in sins, how would you feel about that? God commanded killing for a specific reason in a specific time. Not generally, a specific reason. And in all these areas, the human governments have participated because they thought this was God's will. Have human governments carried out holy wars to vindicate God's name? You bet they have. Have human governments and human activities participated in the mass sale of meat products in our time today, contrary to what Seventh-day Adventists teach? How can you say How can you say that here is God's will for us when it was not God's will for Luther, for Abraham, and for Jacob? How can we say it today that we have a different standard? And here we come to my conclusion. Because we're living in the final atonement. What is final atonement? Final cleansing of all sin from all lives of those who will stand before God as the very end of the generations of humankind. How did God make it clear to us what he wanted us to live by in these areas? And I've just chosen those three as examples. We could go to others: jewelry, alcohol, and vegetarianism. He sent a messenger. Didn't he do that in Jeremiah's time? Didn't Jeremiah say something very contradictory to what was thought at the time about surrender to Babylon? It is God's will for you to be punished for your sins. That's treason in the minds of the princes. They wanted to kill him. They tried. So here in all these areas, God is making some very, very big allowances. Keep that word in mind. God allows. Let me just make this as clear as I can. If you have a 2-year-old child, do you make certain allowances for the ability of that 2-year-old child to understand what you're telling that 2-year-old to do or not to do? We do that, don't we? Why do we do that? Because we recognize that the brain of a 2-year-old is not the same as a 17-year-old. We recognize that when you grow up, you begin to understand more things than you had when you were just a baby. So we make allowances, don't we, for some things that are not in harmony with our best wishes. Does God do the same thing? I believe he does it all the time. He has done it in my life. He may have pointed to you, you may have, as you think about it, find things in your life that he made allowances for you, when you were not living totally in harmony with God's will, but were doing what you thought was the best thing. Jacob thought he was doing the right thing. And so if you have come to that point in your life, you've recognized that your parents, God, have made allowances for you in times of lack of understanding. There are two reasons that we read about in the New Testament that God allows for this, in the hardness of men's hearts and the blindness or the ignorance of the times. Ignorance of times, hardness of heart. God made allowances because he wanted to bring them up step by step. If he had told Israel all of the things that they needed to know to be the ones who would bring Christ into this world and worship him, I wonder if there would have been any Israelites to bring out of captivity in Egypt. If they would have known the whole story, 2,000 years practically of suffering and misunderstanding and violations of God's will. And yet God did it for them. God treats us with allowances. God treated Old Testament Christians with allowances. Of course, there weren't any Christians, but they were Old Testament believers with allowances for the lack of understanding and the hardness of men's hearts. Martin Luther lived in what we call the Dark Ages. And the Dark Ages were named that for a reason. They were dark moral ages. In the church especially. In the priests especially. They were dark, dark ages. And Martin Luther had about all that he could handle, I think, to bring people to an understanding of that salvation is by faith alone, not by human works. And that was a huge, huge turnaround in everything they believed in at that time. And Martin Luther was accepted because he believed that with all his heart, while he did not live the kind of life that would be happy in heaven. Let me just throw this at you. What do you think if you were to walk into heaven and look at the marriage supper of the Lamb? We're going to have a huge table set out before us in the heavenly city of Jerusalem, New Jerusalem. And if we walked up to that table, laid out with everything that heaven could provide for us to enjoy and feast with, and we looked up one side, and we looked down the other side, and we said, where's the good stuff? I don't see what I like on this table. There's a bunch of vegetables here, and fruits, and nuts, and grains, and seeds. You know what I like, Lord. You know what I like. Wouldn't that be sad? I think that'd really be sad. It will happen, I'm sure, because people in the Middle Ages are going to expect to see that same diet on the heavenly table. So it's going to happen. But what a tragedy if the final generation, with all the light from God that has been given to this generation living in our times, with all the information that we have today, we know more than Abraham ever knew about God's plan of victory in the great controversy. Abraham saw a few glimpses. And you and I, know more than Abraham ever had a chance to know. Or any Old Testament person, or some in the New Testament as well. God makes allowances for hardness of heart and ignorance of the times. And he blesses people who are caught up in that. And he will save them, keep that in mind. He will save them, but he cannot be vindicated by them. There can be no ending of the great controversy if they continue to live that way, because the answers are not clear enough yet. Final atonement is about clearing the decks of all misunderstanding of God's will. And that's why we are in this world today, is because we haven't gotten the picture just yet. In fact, I was going to share one statement here that I'm looking for right now, that I hope I still have it here. Yeah, I think it is here. Well, maybe I don't have it. I'm not going to try to hunt for it. The fact that God is looking for people who will always tell the truth about his character. That's the only vindication of God that can take place. And we can live that kind of life by his power alone, but we can live that kind of life. And we will not have to apologize for what's on the marriage supper, what's on the table of the marriage supper of the Lamb. We will say, this is what I've been living with for the last 30 years of my life. It's great. Bring on more just like this, and keep it coming, Lord. That's the way I want to walk up to that table, because that table will not have, as Ellen White was fond to say, the corpses of animals on it. It will not be there for the rest of eternity. And we don't need to have a heart conversion on that at the 1 minute before Jesus comes. That had better be happening in our lives today. So, why do we have a close of probation? Why do we have a last generation, a final generation? For the vindication of God's name, for the destruction of Satan's lies, and for God's name to be standing forever without question when we walk into his presence forever. And you know what? There's a group of people called the 144,000. I hope that we'll be part of that. Taken to heaven without seeing death. That reality. We're going to have one more job in heaven that wasn't done before that time. Our job will be to go to all of the worlds that God has created, talk to all the people that are interested in discussion about these issues. How could you live in a world like that and come to the place where you were done with sinning forever? Really? Tell me how it happened. And you and I, if we're part of that group, will be the witnesses to the entire universe of God's ultimate vindication, because we lived his life in the Day of Atonement. We weren't going back to God made allowance for that. No more of that. We're not going to place our confidence in God's mercy. We're going to place our confidence in God's justice and his mercy. Both have to come together. And then we will have a safe universe to live in. So, folks, I am looking forward to being part of that generation, if that's God's will for us to be that. It is his will, I shouldn't even say that, if it's our willingness to say yes to that provision that he has made. The final generation are the vindicators of God's name and the protectors of the universe from sin ever arising again. That'll be our job in heaven. Our mission is to go out to the entire universe and tell our story of what God accomplished in poor mortal sinners like us, and they will stand amazed at our testimony. So I'm looking forward to that. I want to be part of that. I don't want to be the halfway Christians anymore. I want to be 100% Christ-like, and I want to live without sinning ever again for all eternity. Are you willing to ask God to be with us? I'm going to just ask for prayer right now. I'm not going to ask us to kneel because I can't kneel without the changing of the microphone, and so I'm not going to ask you either. Father in heaven, I pray that your Holy Spirit will guide each one of us, that we will take this commitment to heart, that we will be the final generation, the last group of people who will live on this earth in the midst of sin without ever touching it again, without ever going back into sinful habits, without ever saying, well, I've just messed up one more time. Lord, I pray for this church and everyone who is hearing this to be part of that final generation for whom Jesus is working right now in the heavenly sanctuary. And I thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. Final generation. That's the mission of Adventism, by the way. We are told that our mission is to win souls. Yes, of course it is. But our primary mission, our big mission, is to vindicate God's name. When that's done, everything else will work well. Thank you for coming tonight. We're going to focus on tomorrow morning, a little bit different, but somewhat the same. What is a Seventh-day Adventist? What really is a Seventh-day Adventist? And we'll talk about that at church time. Then we have more meetings in the afternoon. You're not going to be done with me for another day yet. And so we have more meetings in the afternoon. One of them is called Protestant or Catholic. And I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about you and me. Are you Protestant or are you Catholic? Right now, according to what you believe about how salvation works. Okay, we'll see you tomorrow. Thank you for coming tonight.